This is Tirana's AcreForward, the ag industry's most thought-provoking podcast. Listen to interesting people as we go in-depth into the issues affecting crop advisors, growers, and farm communities, uncovering the truth about the ag business and using technology to prepare for the unforeseeable. Ready to explore the future? Let's dig in.
Welcome to the AcreForward podcast. My name is Mike DePaula, Chief Commercial Officer for Tirana's. And in today's episode, I'm pleased to present and have a discussion here with Damian Mason. Now, many of you know who Damian Mason is. It's hard not to in the ag industry with all of his capabilities. I'm going to allow you, Damian, just to introduce yourself because I don't think I can do it justice. I've seen you do an introduction. Why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about who you are and what you focus on?
Got it. Well, thanks for having me on here, Mike. I speak at agricultural events all over North America. So if your listeners have run across me, it'd be from that. Ag retail events, seed, feed, chemical, machinery, crop insurance, ag finance, you name it, producer groups. So I speak at ag events all over North America. I also produce the Business of Agriculture podcast. I've got about almost 300 episodes out now. So I've been doing that for 6 years. And I also host a thing called the Business of Ag Success Group. And for the last 2 years, one of my side jobs has been working with a group called XtremeAg, where I produce their video content and their audio content. I am also a personality at events for them, and I host panels. We're talking about forward-thinking farming operations that are doing some trials and a lot of testing and new practices, new products. So I do some work with them. So those are the big things. I own a farm in Northeast Indiana. That's where I was raised. A picture of it behind my shoulder over there. Huntington, Indiana. Was raised on your basic Midwestern dairy farm of its era. I rent out. I own about 300 acres, 200 of it which is in farm ground. I rent it out to a dairy operation. I manage about 65, 70 acres of timber, have some conservation ground, and then I also live half the year in Arizona. My degree is in agricultural economics. I started in corporate America in 1992 when I graduated, 93 I guess it was, when I actually started my job. And I lasted less than 2 years. I quit corporate America to become a political comedian. Everybody always kind of thinks that's funny, from a farm boy, agricultural economics, corporate, selling lighting products, to then to political comedy. And then I transitioned to being an agricultural guy over the years. So that's kind of the quick and dirty on my stuff.
Well, you have an amazing background, and I've seen a lot of you on YouTube. We hear a lot about you in the industry. So truly a pleasure to have you here on the AcreForward podcast, Damian. Thank you for doing it. A couple of things. One, you said it's an odd combination. Really, I think you have to have a good sense of humor if you're living and working and growing up on a farm, especially maybe to get through some of these challenges, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there's a few things with that. I mean, I'm one of my books I wrote that being funny is like being tall. You either are or you are not, and it's going to be very obvious to the world by the time you're about 18 years old. And the worst thing in the world is a person that's not funny trying to be. We've been there, Mike. You've been in corporate meetings where the polite laughter, or worse yet, the suck-up laughter, where the CEO makes a bad joke and you're all supposed to pretend it was the funniest thing you heard in the world. We all know what that is. Well, there's not necessarily a funny gene. There's a funny growth. And so when I say it's going to be obvious to everybody by the time you're 18, hell, it's probably obvious to everybody by the time I was 6. I was the youngest in a large family. There's 9 of us kids.
Oh,
so
wow.
You're youngest, you kind of a lot of times end up being funny so you can get attention, witty. That was kind of my background. I was a funny kid, and that kept growing. So part of the funny comes from that. Part of the funny probably, when you talk about it with ag, I was born in 1969, and I was a pretty sharp kid. I paid attention. I paid attention to media. I watched what was going on, and I watched what was going on starting around 1981. So you talk about humor. There was nothing funny about the years from, say, 81 until sometime in the 90s in agriculture. It was a very, very dark time. So that helped, I don't know. But I can tell you that's my background is I was a funny kid and got funnier because of upbringing, I would say.
So I lead a lot of sales functions as part of what I do. And I've made the comment, like, if you know, everybody knows Dave Chappelle. What they don't know, unless you really know, when you look at these guys, the amount of education they have in the fine arts and how they understand narrative and story. And selling is more than, it's a connection with people, but a good sale is a story and telling a story and drawing that connection. So I do have a passion for stand-up comedy. I really love comedy and the arts, but I see how it actually benefits people. We probably don't talk about it a lot in ag, right? But when I think about it in your background, what I really wanted to ask a little bit was, where do you see the parallels to be good at comedy as a craft? And then you look at business and you look at, say, sales. Where do you see those intersections, or am I wrong?
Yeah, there's probably plenty of intersections because it's all human interaction. So I guess when you start from the very beginning, Mike, let's start there. It's all human interaction, and then you're talking about communication. And we already referenced the example of the CEO that tries to be funny and it sucks and gets polite laughter. Well, it's even worse when the person doesn't have the position of CEO. The person is a salesperson trying to get your business and tries to be funny. It comes off poorly, right? So the parallels, and there's a bunch of them, we can talk about. I mean, there's a lot of direction here, Mike. First off, it's understanding the audience.
Okay.
It's understanding the audience, and then also realizing that you exist because of the audience. A story I've used a number of times is that your business gets better. When I quit my job, my political comedy career actually was very unique in that it wasn't just, hey, have you noticed this? Hey, gosh, and Richard Nixon. My comedy career was, I dressed up as Bill Clinton with fat padding and makeup and gray hair, and made myself look older and painted my hair gray. And I switched over to a wig because the hair paint was giving me, lung problems. And I would deliver a program in the persona as Bill Clinton. So it was political contemporary comedy, current event comedy, right out of today's newspaper. And then it was delivered in the persona of Bill Clinton. So you had the narrative hook. And so I learned a lot of stuff by doing it that, honest to God, I'm not sure I knew it then, but you do what works. So one story that I've used as an example, Mike, was that it was probably 2 years in, at least 1 year in, when I started getting good, because you struggle, man. This is, as I say all the time, any city of consequence, you're in the suburbs of Indianapolis. Indianapolis had 4 comedy clubs. When I started, I was in Indianapolis in 1994 when I quit my job. And there was Crackers, and there was the Indy Downtown, there was the Broad Ripple Comedy Club, there was 3, and then the 4th one opened up down in Greenwood. There's 4 comedy clubs. That doesn't happen anymore. There's not 4 comedy clubs in the Metroplex. And so it was a different thing. But also, it was hugely competitive. Whether you're in Indy or whatever, every town of consequence that has a comedy club, or had back then, also had open mic night. Tuesday night, you were supposed to sometimes pay to even get the right to get up on stage to work out some material. You had to usually bring people and have a drink minimum before they would even let you, because that many people wanted to get on stage to work out material. And the thing I'm pointing this out is, it is a difficult business. There's no such thing as open accountant night. The Tyrannus accountant doesn't even want to be an accountant, let alone nobody doing it for free on a Tuesday night. So it's a difficult business. So when you get good, and few people do, and I'm not being arrogant, I turn it into a business. Most people never get past open mic night. The reason I turn it into a business, you talk about parallels, and I'm going back, here's a long answer to a short question, is first off, I started realizing that after open mic night, after getting paid, after getting this thing sold, I learned it wasn't about writing jokes. I thought, man, my job was to write jokes. Joke writers get paid to write jokes. I realized I was the show. That crowd is the reason you exist. You could be brilliant. Jerry Seinfeld, you referenced Johnny Carson, some of the best in the business.
Absolutely.
And unless you have a paying audience, your talent is meaningless. And it took me a while to get there, and you get sometimes jaded, and you get mistreated coming up, and you get talked down to, and whatever. But you learn, as pissed off as I am right now about my plane ride, and the person in charge of me mistreated me and talked down to me like I'm the hired help, when you get on that stage, you're on. It's just because of the audience. And that's where I think everybody in business would do themselves a favor. Now, do you get to a point, if you're amazing and you're successful and you've put a bunch of hay in the barn, meaning a bunch of money, can you pick and choose? Yeah, we all try to get there. Few people do. I kind of have now. And it's not because I'm arrogant, but I know what I came up through. I'm still all about the audience, but I'm going to make sure that I am in a situation where I can more likely win with the audience. when you're, and it going right back to business, when you don't have any customers, you take every customer you can get. You take every gig you can get. Then you try to get to where you can turn down gigs. And it's the exact same parallel. When you talk about drawing it back to business, you want to get to where you're a powerful enough brand, you have enough book of business, you have enough perceived awareness, brand awareness, and enough daily demand that you can turn down gigs that are bad fits. That is a parallel that most people never get. How do you get there? Well, frankly, you probably get there by doing a whole bunch of the stuff that you didn't want to do to where you can finally turn down the stuff. And that's a business message right there all on its own. The other thing that you spoke of when you said, Mike, about, drawing parallels, business and comedy. So another thing, now you spoke of everything from Chappelle to whoever. When I was a political comedian, and it's different now, I know you're going to bring this up later, I'm not afraid to let my views show now.
Right.
I believed back at a certain point in time that it was my job to get on that stage and deliver current event comedy. Did I tailor it to the crowd? Absolutely. Because when you're in front of the Tyrannus, you said there's 120 employees. It's the national meeting for all the employees and maybe spouses and guests. So there's 200 people there. And you're like, you get some read ahead of time. You call and you ask some questions. You learn, you do some background research and say, Mike, what do I need to know about this crowd? And then move. Always ask open-ended questions. It's another big one right there. Hey, Mike, what do I need to know about this crowd? Are they all males? No. Okay. Instead say, tell me about the demographics. Tell me what you know about this crowd. And then let the person expand on it a little bit. And if you need to ask specifics, you can. But then you're letting them explain stuff in their from their perspective. So then I'd always say, okay, now I understand this crowd. And then I would make sure that I wrote jokes specific to that crowd. Maybe only a few minutes worth in a 45-minute set, maybe only 3 minutes that were specific to that crowd. But the thing is, because most people care about themselves, in fact, all people care about themselves, and most people are very centered on themselves, their little world, what happens in the cubicle next to theirs, whatever. So in 3 minutes of a 45-minute set, when you make it about, hey, that Mike DiPolo guy, blah, blah, blah. Hey, let me tell you about that. And I have this intern, her name was Sarah, blah, blah, and everybody like, they'll remember that 3 minutes maybe better than the other 42 minutes in a 45-minute set because it's about them. So the other thing that I would say when you talk about a parallel is make sure that some part of your offering, hey, we sell widgets. Our widgets are just like this. They're amazing widgets. They're all made in, Akron, Ohio, and blah, blah, blah. Well, you better make sure there's something about that widget that is about them. And that's something else that I was very, very good at understanding after I got going. So there's no reason for you if there's no audience. And then also there needs to be some element that's all about them because then they can afterwards say, boy, you got Mike DiPolo. That time when you made that joke about Mike, blah, blah, blah. It makes it about them. There has to be that because the sad part is most people, as much as they might enjoy a Newt Gingrich joke about Hillary's rose garden or whatever, that's kind of out here.
Right.
But you gotta have the stuff that brings it back a little bit. So I've answered a lot.
No, you're doing, it's great because what we believe and what I see is you have to know your audience. You have to care about them. So you said something interesting, like you have to hold your views back, but you learn since then. Something I believe is the more authentic and honest you are about yourself, you have to be appropriate, respectful of your audience. But the more authentic you are, you're going to get to the truth one way or another. The sooner you're there, the better that relationship's going to be, or you're going to get to that outcome a lot quicker. I also hear when you say this, we think about connecting to people. Well, you can't serve someone if you don't love them. You can't love or care about them if you don't know them. So I hear a man in your voice, I hear you saying, before I do this, I love my craft, but I want to know my audience so I can care about them, so I can serve them, so I can do this properly. So I see 2 books behind you, and I spent 12 years with Syngenta, so I spent a lot of time, and I've been in other roles in the GMO space. I spent time in the chem space. I'm also, obviously with what I do now with tech and where all this comes together, I think your background is really great for a retailer, for somebody today who's serving a grower. And that's something we focus on. But what we don't talk about a lot is how the value chain is changing and where it's going. And we got to think about the people and what that looks like. When you look at the value chain, whether it's input provider to retailer to grower, right? So seeds, chem, like you said, what do you see? What has changed and what do you see changing in the future? And you think about your background, so the business background, the ag background. Just what's changing today and where do you see it going?
Well, everything's changing as it should and as it always has, particularly in the last 100 years. So my farm is in Huntington, Indiana, and we jokingly talk about going to Bippus. Bippus is about 4 miles, 5 miles west of me. It had a grain elevator, a tractor dealership, a white farm equipment tractor dealership when I was a kid. It had a convenience store, restaurant, funeral home, I think it was, a bank, whatever. There's almost nothing there now. And we can say, and I hear it said from people that are outside of ag, well, if we had small farmers, a town like Bippus would still be there. Well, that may be true. Let's go through some other things that are changing. There's obviously consolidation happening in production agriculture. That has happened since the 1930s. In my book back here, Food Fear, I addressed this. We hit peak farm in the mid-1930s. We had about 6.8 or so million farms. Okay. There's 2 million farms today. There were 3 million farms when I was born 54 years ago. So we've got 50% less farms today than we had half a century ago. We've got, less than 1/4 that we did. But the point is, this has been going on for a long time. Are these towns going to remain there when there's less farms? Well, there's that. There's also the reality of rural America. It's not just the consolidation of agriculture, it's called decreasing family size. I'm one of 9 children. You mentioned you're from a large family. Go through outside of Utah and look at the child count per family, and it's not very great. This is happening all over the place, and so you're going to have less of that. Then we can talk about the Amazon effect, which has not only changed all of retail, it's going to change agricultural retail. I could get on my phone right now, and I'm not even saying I could buy it from Amazon. It's the Amazon effect. I could get on this smartphone right now, and I could have chemistry products dropped at my farm in Indiana, and I'm talking to you from my house in Phoenix, and I could get that done. Could I have done that 20 years ago, even 10 or 5 years ago? Probably not. That's happening in retail. I think ag retail is going to be a tough spot because of the Amazon effect. Now, there's the other part of this in that expertise is still required, and obviously distribution is still required. When we talk about these small towns like the Bippus, Indiana, we can go around every town in my home county, and each of them had a grain elevator. I can go within a few miles of my farm, and I can find individual farmers who have about 10 times the grain handling and holding capacity of the average small town grain elevator that had just in the 1970s, let's say. These things are obviously going to have an impact. If you've got 5 million bushels of storage on your own farm, obviously you don't need the little grain mill that was in Bippus, Indiana. So these things are happening. So what big changes are going to continue, in my opinion? Well, the population thing is going to continue going this way. Consolidation among production ag is going to continue on its same path. There are 2 million farms in the United States, but let's be honest, and I talked about this in my book, about 175,000 of those farms are what you'd call farmers of consequence. Now, I'm not being mean. I'm talking about those that are actually going to be Tyrannus customers, those that are actually going to be ag retail customers of any significance. I rent my farm ground out. I got $83 of patronage from Cirrus Cooperative last year because I bought maybe 5 gallons worth of diesel or of glyphosate, 2.5 gallon jug of 2,4-D, and a few tanks of diesel and gas. Reality: you can't have a ag retailer or a cooperative based on Damian Mason as an ag customer. So these things are going to continue to happen. Those that are consolidated, larger scale agricultural producers are going to have more suitors. This has happened already. If you're Damian Mason, you don't expect the co-op to come and call on you to sell you $300 worth of herbicide per year. If you buy $300,000 worth of herbicide per year, you're probably going to get more attention. These are the realities. Customer will become a bit more powerful. When you have more suitors and you are fewer in number and larger in size, you then get more attention. You probably get more economies of scale. Customer ends up winning, and I'm talking about the customer that goes to Kroger, ends up winning because food prices remain low. The people that run down the road then say, well, this is a travesty. We should not allow this. Well, then I'd say, what is your proposal? The U.S. Department of Agriculture and I keep up with all their publications. I have a brother that works there, and this is not his words. Trust me, he's terrified I'm ever going to say it. He tells me that. Most of the programs, Mike, favor small. Frankly, you could say that USDA programs perpetuate or can keep in business some of the lesser efficient operations. If you are of a certain size, you're opted out based on your adjusted gross income, based on your gallons of milk or pounds of milk or acre. There's a bunch of things that kick you out after a certain level. So the USDA, you could argue, is keeping a bunch of smaller scale producers, maybe even less efficient producers, afloat. If that's what the American taxpayer wants, or that's what the USDA funding is dictated toward, so be it. But I think that the average consumer in the suburbs of Phoenix here don't know that. What's going to continue to change? Automation, obviously. We do have labor issues. We will continue to have labor issues. A lot of folks think that we have unemployment again. If we slow down this economy, if the Federal Reserve can just crank down the screws and make things worse, that all of a sudden we'll have a whole bunch of unemployment. Everybody's going to run and get jobs, and they won't demand wage increases. So let me ask you this. Google was in the news about a month ago. They're going to lay off 10,000 people. Do you really believe that anybody that's laid off from Google is going to show up at the dairy farm in Ohio and say, I just got laid off from Google. I want to now put milkers on cows? No. No. It absolutely will not happen. So where the layoffs are happening aren't going to necessarily do anything for production ag. So we're going to continue to automate. One of my big things, I put a video out about it, was, can we automate quickly enough? The economics of it will work out. One thing that I've predicted for a while is that we will maybe see contractual production continue. It's happened on the scale of pork. Okay. Almost all hogs now are raised in a contractually arranged, vertically integrated system. It's happened. Poultry was first. It was in the 70s, and then it was the 90s, 2000s for pork. Will it come to dairy or beef? That's one of the questions I've posed, and you kind of argue that it is almost that way right now on the beef, because you've got these huge players, the Tysons, the Cargills, whatever, that essentially have a system in place where they're not taking as much risk. So it's kind of there. Will contractual production come on the other stuff? One of my thoughts is all this source verified that we've seen in meat. Will it get to where Walmart, #1 food selling company in the country, Kroger, go about the supply chain and say, our customers continually want to know where their food comes from. So it's not just source verified or country of origin on a piece of steak, but it's celery. Is it going to get to where everything in the grocery store has the, shall we say, the chain of where it comes from, how it was treated? Is that something that information or these things that we carry around with the smartphones are going to allow us to? I don't know. I've contemplated that. I don't have a bold prediction on it, but I've contemplated that based on where some other things have gone, might be where groceries are going. So those are a couple of big predictions, or at least contemplations I have.
Well, I think that's interesting, because we have, I've wondered that too, because are they willing to pay more for some of these different attributes? And the one thing we know as an industry is farmers are going to be under increased pressure in the value chain to show why they've done what they've done, we know they're good stewards in many cases, in most cases for that matter. We know how this really works, but I think one thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this is the majority of people don't trust and don't know and want to see it and want to understand. At least that's the trend that we're seeing today. So automation, yep, that's a trend that's moving forward. I don't know how involved you see different things in ag tech, and that's a pretty big bucket, whether it's equipment, GPS, or the things like what we are doing. Why has ag tech been a struggle in terms of adoption from your point of view for retail and growers? I mean, what's kind of, I don't think it's behind the curve, but I know it's a different industry. I think I understand the reasons why, but for the average person coming in to invest, to be part of this, or there are people skeptical of ag tech in our industry, right? Why is that the case? Like what has led us to this point where many are skeptical and then many on the outside believe it should be easier than it is to move technology from one industry into the ag space?
Well, there's a bunch of things we can go there. So my co-host of the Business of Ag Success Group, which is a networking group I put on Zoom meetings every 2 weeks with this group, and it's basically Ag Professionals Network. And my co-host is a guy named Todd Thurman, and he has been on my podcast a number of times, and we've discussed this. And one of his statements that's very accurate, he says, we pretend in agriculture that we're just so disparately different from all other industries that nobody could ever even understand. Well, it's true that the consumer doesn't understand farming. We get that. But to pretend that what happens within our industry is so disparately different from another industry is probably us. It's almost like the same thing where we like to pat ourselves in the back and tell ourselves how awesome we are. Sometimes it's that way also. You said that the pace of adoption in ag lags the rest of the...
That would be the perception on certain technologies from other industries coming into ag.
I would argue that we are not a laggard by a comparative analysis to any other. If you took your shirts to the dry cleaners in Westfield, Indiana at the end of the week, do you think that they have adopted every technology that the most technologically savvy dry cleaners has in Yazoo City, Mississippi, whatever that should be? So let's look at what really happens in every other thing. And that's, again, it's kind of like listening to your show, like the audience. Let's look at every other industry, and because ag people have a hard time with this. We're so into what we do, we don't look at other industries. We get excited and say, okay, well, look what they're doing in cars. Cars have, really advanced technology. Well, kind of. First off, Ford's losing $3 billion, last headline I read, on their push into this year, on their push into EVs. So are they really brilliantly charging down this road of EV adoption? Is the consumer rapidly buying EVs? No, they are doing so if the tax incentives, if you are a wealthy person and you get tax credits or reduction of the cost, you can do it. Trust me, the poor folks ain't buying EVs because it still don't make any sense for them. So is there really all this adoption of stuff? So do we really lag as an industry? We had self-driving tractors or GPS-guided machinery before it was common anywhere else. We were already cutting back. I was a DuPont intern in 1991, and I am going to just go ahead and throw this out there. In the 1970s, growing up, had a really good ag economy, fling the shit out there. And let's face it, chemistry was fairly affordable. Corn and beans was through the roof. Tractors were getting better. We went out and flinged everything from Dual to Lasso. Name some of the old chemistry from that era. You're old enough. You came up in Syngenta. And I'm not in any way bashing on the chemical industry. It's what we did. By 1991, when I was an intern for DuPont, we had a product called Accent. It was a post-emerge grass killer used predominantly in corn, and it killed Johnson grass and shattercane, two very, very invasive species, if you will. And the rate of that, and I'm going on memory here from 30 plus years ago, was like half an ounce per acre. You're talking about just from the 70s to the 1991 that we remarkably and significantly reduced rates. And you can say, well, you just had more dominant chemicals, you had more concentrated chemicals. Well, that's kind of true too. But look at what we've already done. So the pace of technology, and I know I'm saying chemistry as a technology because it is.
It absolutely is.
Okay, GMOs. Yes, they get the whole bad rap by the people that go to Whole Foods who don't know any better. Luckily, that has waned. It seems like once COVID, then climate crisis came into being the new fear of the day. GMOs are, back burner, if not even in the kitchen. So anyway, adoption of technology, what do we have going right now? 97% or 91% of all the soybeans grown use GMO technology, which reduces diesel, which reduces chemistry. So I'd say that to pretend that we're not good at adopting technology is probably not accurate. And I know that it probably disagrees with you, and I'm not being disagreeable. One thing that I'd say, though, Mike, we're going to see and I tell my audiences, we're going to see a bigger bunch of tech coming from outside of ag than we've ever seen. This started a few years ago. Huge money from like Silicon Valley, tech companies, non-ag. It was the Elon Musk effect. Elon Musk didn't come from Toyota nor General Motors. He came from completely outside of auto, shook up, and also is now dominant in automobiles. Most valuable car company in the world, Tesla. He didn't come from an auto background. The growth in technology coming to ag will accelerate, in my opinion, from away from ag. I'm not talking about Bill Gates and some of these things that are more nefarious, frankly. I'm talking about real investment money coming in saying, what if we could reduce water usage? Great example right here. This is from a couple weeks ago on the Wall Street about Kansas is trying to get water because their aquifer is running dry. I've been hearing about the Ogallala Aquifer and reading about it since I picked up National Geographic in like 1980. Why is it still not handled? It'll be outside money. It'll be outside ag forces that take care of this. That's where I think we're going to benefit. The autonomous machinery. Oh, I know John Deere and Case New Holland are working on it. But I think it's going to be a Tesla moment that really revolutionizes it, where they come in and say, hey, that's great. You are legacy equipment manufacturers. You're sticking with the mindset of equipment manufacturer. Here's the new thing. And that's where I wonder if some of this outside technological force is going to come in and really shake things up in a good way.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think part of it is, are the outsiders getting better at understanding what is different about ag or these nuances? Because I agree with you. The chemistry, the biology, the GMO, even the adoption of the mechanical and the data tech that we've done today is at a significant pace. Right? And I do think we're special in some ways, and I think sometimes we put that as a guard. But when you look at a lot of the investors that have come in and the amount of success and failure that's inherent in venture capital, when do the external forces outside of ag fully understand what they're entering into to be able to get to that level of acceleration? When does it become important enough where it creates those disruptive moments?
I don't know if the flow of money is what it was. One of my sponsors from my Business of Agriculture podcast, a company called Pattern Ag. It's all about predictive analysis of so that way you understand your likelihood of cyst nematode in a field before you treat it, or you have to treat whatever. And so that's outside technology, and they have outside investor money. It's my understanding when I sit down with the higher ups of Pattern Ag that the money's not flowing into startup companies in ag like it was just a few years ago. Biologicals were another spot that was, my goodness, here's this earthworm urine. So dump this earthworm urine in here. Anyway, there's a lot of them that are there, and a lot of them are working, but it got a whole boatload of money coming into it. I just met with a company in November in Arizona. It's got Mars money, and I'm talking about the candy.
Oh yeah, I know the company. Absolutely.
You're not talking about someone that can toss 80 grand or something. You're talking about someone that can toss 8 million or 80 million or 100 million, whatever, into something.
Right.
These things are happening. Sometimes it's chasing whatever other tech money is doing and investor capital stuff. Sometimes they don't seek to solve the most immediate problems. That's been my observation. Well, they get real excited about, bold, new, big stuff. What about some of the simple things? Again, what about the fact that right now the bulk of human hands are needed for specialty produce, tree fruit, livestock production, and meat processing? Well, if we know that we're going to have labor issues, where can we ease that pain? The answer used to always be get bigger. Combines get bigger, whatever. Well, that's fine. And we keep going that direction. Why not go over here and say, how can we use less hands? And that's not happening, I don't think, as quickly as possible. The other one, of course, is water. Water is going to become more and more of a battle. And we're not, when the irrigation companies talk about deploying technology, they mean that you can run irrigation on your phone. Right. It doesn't mean use less water. And that's what really, and they'll say, no, you can cut back water. I'm like, come on. If we're going to be battling over this stuff, what about making gains where between crop breeding and water usage, we're talking about decreasing the water need
amount required. Yeah.
Decreasing it by half, and that's not happening. So maybe it just is physically impossible, or maybe we're not deploying the resources always where some of the easy things are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things to tackle. We've looked at it. So our company started with investment outside, particularly Israeli tech, but also some other really, really good investors. And we've been successful even recently. But I think it's because we look at it differently. And we're thinking about how do we solve a problem? One that you mentioned, just in corn, bean, and cotton, just open field row. Finding labor to do scouting and do it well and know what's happening in the crop. I think you mentioned game tape and studying it. We know what the planter tells us it did. We know what the combine thinks it got. But in between, we're not really recording in a systematic way and understanding what the crop looks like. Have a game tape for your field. And so we saw that as a way, as a company, if we could capture it and layer different technologies to make that capture affordable and to help people do it. We're solving labor problems. We're also trying to provide an answer as farms get bigger, as retailers have to care for larger customers. How do you just know what's going on and get better? But I think we're a little bit unique in that we have that marriage of agricultural people understanding tech and respecting the market. And I think you're seeing more change. I think you're seeing a lot more people start to understand that. I think the retailer is a big part of that, because the people that serve in retail, Damian, the advisors, whether the value chain shifts and we have different entities or not, those people are going to be required to provide that expertise to these farms in some way, shape, or form 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now. So we try to bet on the people. But I really like kind of the thought about, where this is going, respecting what's here. But the dark horse folks kind of coming in that you don't expect, are there any that you would bet on, that you have inklings on, that you think will come in and help solve some of these problems in ag?
As a company or as a brilliant person, no. I'll throw another one at you. You talk about fixing the simple stuff.
Okay.
Sometimes in ag, we honest to God are really, really out here on some stuff. Again, let's go to the biologicals. We don't understand much about the soil. I think we might know more about the surface of Mars than sometimes we know about the soil in Indiana. But here's an easy one. And I was just talking about this on a recording I did for XtremeAg a few weeks ago. There's a hilly field in Iowa, and one of our guys took a picture of it, and the ditch along the road was completely overfilled with silt and sediment runoff from that field that had been fall tilled. We're out here, let me get this straight. We're out here throwing $1 billion of venture capital money at a biological that's going to come in a little jar, and we're going to put, I'm holding a glass right now, 14 ounces. We're going to put 14 ounces of this product per acre to improve the biology and the workings within that soil. And boy, that's going to do great things for us. That's nice. But let's start by handling the most rudimentary problem. Why in the hell did you go out on a 24% slope field and fall till it? It's worth $20,000 an acre, and you dumbass, you just plowed it up so it could wash away. And so you've got the easy, what do they call it, low-hanging fruit, Mike?
Yeah.
The low-hanging fruit is stop. What do they tell you? The first rule in medicine: first, do no harm. Okay. If I want to fix you, let's not start by breaking your arm, right? Why don't we first stop doing harm to our soil? We're going to look back, and 10 years, maybe 20, I hope to goodness it's sooner than that, about all the tillage that we do, and be like, oh God, they also used to use leaches for healthcare purposes. That's how devastating I think the over-tillage is. It's terrible for the environment. It's terrible for the valuable asset that is soil. And the guy, and this is the point I made, I said, the guy that had all that problem happen, you know what he blames? He doesn't blame himself. He doesn't say, yeah, I went out there and I did something the way great-grandpa did. I went out there and, fall plowed that field. You know what he blames? The weather.
The weather.
He's blaming the weather. He's not blaming himself. So these new products and this automation is amazing, and this technological advance and what Taranis is doing is fantastic. But when you're out scouting fields, the first thing you could do is, hey, I just scouted this. You not only should have not fall tilled that, you should have been putting cover crops out. Oh, we can't make cover crops work around here. I've been hearing that now for 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
I think the first easy leap is cover crop adoption, cover crops that work in any environment from North Dakota to the Panhandle of Texas, and reduction of water, and then better treatment of our soil. Agricultural ground is about double to 120% more valuable today than it was just 5 years ago. And what are we doing to it? In some cases, we're absolutely babying it and coddling it and doing all the things we have to take care of that precious resource. In other cases, we're letting it wash down the Mississippi River.
So this is interesting, because I think the tillage, so I drive through every morning, Tipton and Hamilton County. I live in Rushville, and I see a lot of seed production, right? Yeah. And the seed production
ground has got 0%. It's as flat as my desktop, and they still till it. They still farm it the way that they did in 1950.
Right? And that's what I was going to get to. Is I think because there's different circumstances, different, you mentioned the grade or the slope, and there's different, when you look at production and what is holding people back for cover crops, do you think it should be on every acre? What would have to change? What's holding people back from adopting these things that you believe are better, or that many believe are better? What are the barriers?
What's holding people back in ag is the same thing that's holding people back in every person's job and every person's small business and every person's life. It's between their two ears, generally. And you're going to say, the person listening is going to say, what the hell do you know? You're just a comedian. You're out here trying to tell me how to farm. I've been farming for 60 years. I'd say the smartest move ever, a smart statement that was made by Gabe Brown. Gabe Brown wrote a book called Dirt to Soil. He's a regenerative guy. I'm not a regenerative zealot. I'm not an organic person. I'm not out here, sprinkling soil on my salads. I'm just telling you that Gabe Brown says something pretty smart. If you want to make small changes, change how you do things. You want to make big changes, change how you see things, change how you think about things. You cannot tell me. I was an FFA soil judging. I was a wannabe agronomist. You cannot tell me that cover cropping is an impossibility. And there are people that tell you it will work. I'm so sick of that kind of thing. And what that really means is it won't work. It won't work without me changing. It won't work without me changing how I do and, more importantly, see and think about things. And so the other part of it is all this tillage. Those folks that you drive by, they're going to tell you they have to because it's tight soils. And we don't have any erosion problem here. Really? I've driven up by Highway 31 a number of times in the winter, and I saw snert. You know what snert is? Snow dirt. It means that stuff that was tilled up in October, then it froze and got crusty, then all those nasty January, February storms came, and they blew your dirt over to this guy. Best thing you could ever do is be on the east side of Highway 31 versus the west side, because you probably gained about 4 inches of topsoil if you're on the east side. I know exactly what you're talking about. And those people will pretend that it not only doesn't harm their soil, but it actually is helping it to do what they do. Oh, it helps drainage. It helps. I politely disagree. And I believe that we're going to get better about that front. And when you figure it's the absolute basis of everything we do in agriculture, soil is, why don't we understand it better and why don't we treat it better? That's just one of my big things. So, and it's old habits die hard.
Old habits die hard, and especially if they're perceived as working. I think changes are we see that with the technology that we provide, just trying to provide better information so we can look at it, understand it. We take images. You could literally count the spots on a ladybug. FaceTime the farm, ring doorbell for your field. And that's great, right? That can help you see a lot of things. But there's a lot of things that have to change between all the stakeholders involved to fully embrace and understand the power of what that can do. I think change is hard for everybody, and they want to be careful with the risk.
Well, Mike, and I know there's probably somebody that's a big proponent of fall tillage out there. They already hung up and decided that I don't know what I'm talking about, because again, it's hard for people to hear thoughts. Just like nobody will go and break down the tape, you've got to have a special something to sit and listen to your tape. We talked about breaking down tape for comedy.
Yeah,
you've got to have a special something to also analyze and look at what you do and realize you're not as great as you want to be, and your performance will improve if you you view it with a critical eye. That's where looking at your own farming practices, or to your folks, looking at your own ag retailing practices. A friend of mine, he runs a chamber of commerce in Lawrence, Indiana, and he says, just a bit of feedback for business owners. And he talked about he and his wife going out for dinner. He said, have you ever looked at your business from your customer's perspective? And that's the same kind of thing. Have you ever looked at your ag retailer the way the customer walks in and sees it? Is your person that's supposed to be responsive over there on social media, on their phone, are things in disarray? Do you look like a quality organization? How do you dress? How do you approach do you go there and say, well, you know what, same thing as last year, we can be cheaper on this than the guy down the road? That's what's not going to win. Looking at your business from the retail customers' perspective, and also what is it that's going to bring in that person's son or daughter? We talk a lot about the generational thing. So I just think that there's a lot of easy things. I'm not smart enough to be a engineer for Tyrannus, but I'm pretty good at observing things. That's where comedy, gets its genesis. It starts with observation, and you deliver it with point of view and perspective, and then punchline. I'm pretty good at the observation. So I would say let's start by observing what you're doing, whether you're a farming operation or a retail operation. And it's hard to do, and you can't make excuses. Why do you get a laugh? Right? And just go back to the breaking down tape from a comedy. I could have sat there in my hotel and said, well, I went 1 minute and 48 seconds, didn't get a laugh. That's because the audience was dumb. That's because that material only works in Ohio, doesn't work in Tennessee.
Right.
Well, that's because they don't understand what I was going through. And eventually you realize it don't make a damn bit of difference. I didn't get a laugh for 1 minute 48. My job was to deliver laughs. Again, if you have I could have made excuses, but eventually you got to just realize I can keep making excuses until I go bankrupt. I can keep making excuses and never get ahead. Or you can say, when I'm breaking down tape, looking at my business from the perspective of a customer, or looking at my business from the perspective of somebody else's eyes, what did I do that I could do better? And you don't even have to be so critical to say what I do wrong. Just say, what could I improve upon? And I think that a lot of problems get solved and a lot of forward advancement. But again, it takes a special mindset to be able to do that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I want to say thank you to you, Damian. First of all, you have quite a story and you tell it well, and you've got just such a passion for agriculture, but business and what we're all trying to do here. So I want to extend my thank you to you. And I know I've got more questions. I think we could definitely do this again if you're game about a few topics. I am sure we're going to hear about the tillage from a few folks here going forward, but I do want to say thank you. And here at Tyrannus, when we say AcreForward, we're not just talking about driving value for the acre. We think about every acre has a story. And that's what you're talking about is, do you know the audience? Do you know the story? Do you have the game tape? Can you make it better? And all we're trying to do is illustrate that so people can learn from it and really drive their acre forward. So I want to say thank you, Damian, and tell the whole audience out there, and if you want to find out more, go to AcreForwardPodcast.com. That's AcreForwardPodcast.com. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me on here.